Welcome, everyone, to DEI After 5, the show that focuses on topics across diversity, equity, and inclusion with some of the brightest minds in the industry. Here's your hostess, inclusive culture curator and coach, Sacha Thompson.
Hey everyone, and welcome to this episode of DEI After 5. As I continue to prepare for these episodes and think about what is happening across the industry, there's certain things that come up that really need to be talked about or discussed because they're happening, but not many people are talking about it. And so today I really want to talk about where DEI is living, right? We've done some episodes where we talk about it living in HR, or we're talking about it needs to be its own thing. We've started to see some trends where organizations are putting DEI as a part of their social corporate responsibility, or they're putting it as part of their ESG or aspect of their organization, right? Environmental, social, and governance. And so we're going to have a conversation today about what that really looks like, how it could be sustainable regardless of where it falls within the organization, and some other topics kind of tied to where DEI is going in the future. And so my guest today is Kimberly Flanery-Rye, also known as Kimfer for those that follow her on social media. She's a DEI and cultural practitioner that has been doing lots in this space. And so I am just thrilled to have her with us today. So welcome, Kim.
Hello, Sacha. Really excited to be here. And you know what? Conversations after 5, why not?
Right? Why not? Who knows if they're not cut, right? So,
yes, right here.
So, I want to talk about, first of all, how did you get into this work? Because everyone's path, interestingly, seems similar in some ways and then very different. So I want to hear from you. How did you start doing DEI work?
Yeah, thanks for that question. For me, the way that I started DEI was really around culture work first. So we all know the language of DEI has not been here as long as we think that it has, right? Mm-hmm. It has transitions from diversity to diversity inclusion, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Of course, there's JEDI. There's all types of different ways to look at it. But I think, for me, I was actually in an agency. I worked for an agency for about 9 years. I was the vice president and executive creative director. And it was really important for me to look at our products, the way that we were producing our creative, the way that we were putting our teams together. I was building it from a culture perspective, from a diversity perspective, and also making sure that we were being inclusive whenever we created marketing materials, et cetera. And that's really where it all started. And so then I was being invited for speaking engagements from the perspective of how do you put together inclusive creative teams? How do you put together diverse groups, et cetera? So for me, switching that from a creative brand focus with DEI to DEI focused, looking at it from a business, from a brand, et cetera. So for me, that shift, I felt it was pretty, natural transition.
I'm excited to hear your story because so many of the people that I have interviewed for this show or talking to about on this show come from that marketing communications creative background, right? Yeah. My background was in marketing for some time too. So I think exactly what you said, understanding it from a brand perspective, knowing your audience, knowing, the voice of the people that you're trying to represent, all of that ties into DEI work very naturally. And so I appreciate hearing your background because it's just a natural tie-in, and it supports my whole thing of, marketing communications need to be leading DEI versus HR, but that's a whole other conversation.
Yeah, that is a whole different conversation. And I know you had many of those, so we'll leave that aside for now.
Yes, for now. So I want to talk about kind of this corporate social responsibility, ESG, I've been hearing a lot about this lately. There have been a couple of conversations that I've been a part of talking about, DEI now being housed in these areas. So can you talk to me a little bit about what you're seeing kind of in this space and why DEI is being placed there?
Yeah, so I think, from DEI and CSR, or social corporate responsibility, have been pretty together for longer than we even think, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a natural combination. So if you think about social corporate responsibility, oftentimes like philanthropy lives there. Oftentimes that's where areas in which your corporate social responsibility. So DEI being tied to that area makes sense, right? It makes
Mm-hmm.
logical sense. What's been really fascinating is this idea of ESG, the environmental social governance,
Mm-hmm.
being wrapped up around all of this, right? And so I think what it is that area of social and the governance is what's really being tied into diversity, equity, and inclusion and corporate social responsibility. And like we just mentioned, HR is not necessarily always the I'm going to say appropriate place because
Right.
we know there's a bit of a conflict there when you are in traditional, and I don't want to bag on anyone that is in HR, because we know we have some phenomenal people in HR
Absolutely.
that they understand this, but traditional HR is administration and policy to
Yep.
hold on to and make sure that there's no litigation issues, while DEI is like, hey, let's look at that policy, let's look at that and shift it and change it and pushing on that, right? So if you think about it from a social corporate responsibility, it makes more sense. We're like, let's go do the good. Let's go do the good out into the world. The challenge with social corporate responsibility is that they're not looking internally, right?
Absolutely.
Environmental social governance, ESG, is looking internally
Mm-hmm.
as they're trying to figure out how they're doing less damage out into our environment. So that's, I think, where all of these tick and tack is happening. We love a good Venn diagram, and so there's a Venn diagram happening
Yeah.
between all three of them.
I absolutely appreciate the visual of that, because for so many organizations, it's one or the other, right? And I constantly say, DEI needs to be part of your company DNA. So it needs to be in every aspect. And so that Venn diagram that you just described actually talks about that, right? It's internal, it's external. How are we showing up with our customers and clients? How are we showing up with our communities? What impact are we having? Because that's the piece that I think is more of a challenge for organizations,
Oh, for
and
sure.
especially if they're creating harm, right? Because it's one thing to throw money, right? The philanthropy part of it. It's one thing to
Mhm.
do that, but then to actually be reflective and say, how can we be causing harm to the greater environment, people, plants, animals, everything?
Yes.
And how do we mitigate that? That's another part of what we're seeing around climate change, and how climate change ties into DEI, and all of these things that folks are saying, well, no, that's not DEI because that's not dealing with my recruiting, right?
Yeah.
It's so much more than recruiting.
Yeah. I love the fact that you said about harm. So one of the
Mhm.
mantras that I give to my clients is do less harm,
Yes.
right? It is nearly impossible to do no harm because we know how systems work. There's unintended consequences that come out, even with all the good intentions that you have out there. But the
Mhm.
idea is that you want to do less harm in all of these areas. And when it comes to social corporate responsibility, I mean, part of that is like doing good. Of course, you're going to do good. But the
Right.
question is not measuring how good are you doing it, because that's part of the responsibility of that. It's like, are you creating less harm while you're trying to do good,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? That's important. Just like in social corporate, environmental social governance, same thing. The idea is you're going to do good for the environment. Great. While you're trying to do good, are you doing less harm? Same thing with DEI. Obviously, we're trying to do good, but are you trying to do less harm? That's the measurement you want to look at. What less harm are you doing, right? Measure it
I love
on, are
that.
you doing less harm?
I love that. I absolutely love that. Because the question that came to my mind when you were speaking was, yes, we want to do good, but good isn't good for everyone,
Yeah.
right? And so it's that, who could we be harming in this process while we're trying to do good? Because there have been countless examples of organizations over-indexing to try
Mhm.
to seem or appear that they're doing good by creating more harm.
Yeah.
And the one that immediately comes to mind was, again, the summer of 2020, where organizations, did all the black boxes for social media and, speaking up and, Black Lives Matter. And their employees that were Black were saying, guess what? We don't matter. You show us every day that we don't matter. And so they were trying to do good, but the harm that they had been causing for years without, ignoring the voices started to come out, right? So I
Yeah.
love that partnership of, yes, we want to do good, but are we also reducing harm in that process?
Yeah,
So
I like to think of it as like good isn't always good enough. So let's look at the other side of it, right?
right.
And then this idea, and I'm gonna maybe assume because it's after 5 that I can use a little a
Go
little
for it.
swearing here, but I like to say employees are the first ones to call your bullshit in a company.
Absolutely.
Because they know what's happening. And so I think after, like you said, George Floyd's murder and all the black boxes that were coming out, all those DEI promises that were coming out, it was
Yeah.
the employees that said, that's bullshit. That's not what
Yeah.
we're doing. And so many companies were, really put through the floors about it. Like Anthropology. Do you remember Anthropology? And they're like beautiful. I mean, they have these beautiful marketing and soft and all this language that came out, and their teams were like, you know what? We have code words
Yeah.
for Black shoppers, and we
Yeah.
follow around, and we have a code name for them.
Yeah.
Yeah, right? Starbucks, always in and out of, yeah.
Yeah.
And I live in Seattle, and I'm like, come on, Starbucks, all the good
Yeah.
intentions, but, they were like, yeah, we support, do all these things. And then when their employees want to wear Black Lives Matter buttons and things like that, they're like, we can't do that.
Yeah.
Right. And so, like, all of these, there's a difference between what you say and what you do. It
Absolutely.
doesn't mean you can't make mistakes because it is a journey. We get it. But are you learning from it? And are you listening to your community? Or are you making like boardroom decisions without any, like that small set of group of people with the similar lived experience with no other input and making those large decisions?
You know what? You hit the nail on the head in that there's so many organizations that look at the moment and, okay, we have a response for this moment, and don't step back to say, okay, where are there patterns that we are seeing over time, and how do we start to mitigate that, right? So it's not these one-offs that are happening. It looks like a one-off because you're in that moment, but if you step back and look at it systemically, right, there are challenges, right, systemic challenges that these organizations can take on. And I think that leadership needs to, again, listen to those folks that are the most marginalized, that are constantly going through these moments, to say, employee, yes, you are harming me. You're constantly harming me. And this one time that you did this one thing was great, but that does not negate the rest of the harm that you've done and continue to do. So I appreciate you saying that, because there's this learning opportunity that I think organizations have to not just be reactive to what's happening in the media, but how can we be proactive and really understand where we are falling short consistently so that we can fix that and then move on and learn from that. Learn from, oh my gosh, when you said that, I was like,
learn from it.
learn.
Yeah.
Right? Like, what is it? A hard head makes for a soft behind.
Yeah. I mean, I use this hashtag often. It's called do the work. So
Yes.
do the work, right? And the only way you're going to learn from it is if you do the work.
Absolutely.
Over and over and over again. Again, it's a journey. It's not a checkbox. We talk about this all the time. Just because you did it once doesn't mean it's done. It means that we need to continue to do this, and it's work. It's a work in progress. There is a destination, but it isn't a finish line. It is a marathon that I like to say, where that finish line is constantly moving.
Yes.
Right. And so you have to pace yourself. You have to pace yourself and continue and know that that end line is going to constantly move forward with you.
You know, I was on site with a client yesterday, and a couple of them said, the organization's doing all these check boxes. And it reminded me of which, when you said something just now, it just kind of clicked in my head, is employees are going to be the ones that are going to constantly speak up. And what's happening, or what happened, and the reason I got pulled in was organization checked the box. Employees were like, nope, you're not checking this box today because this is our experience. And then now they're shock and awe that they're not having this wonderful experience because that's what we've been telling everyone.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's this reality check of, I call it the Wizard of Oz all the time. People will hear me say that, right? Yeah. Like, you're sold this wonderful, great place, and then you find out it's like a little man on a bicycle behind a curtain. And that's what's happening. It's like people are getting exposed. Organizations are getting exposed. And they will continue to get exposed if their actions and words aren't in alignment. And so, I love what you're saying about do the work, because that's the part, right? It's not just putting up a pretty picture or saying it until it happens. You actually have to do the work in order for employees to see that, okay, they're actually trying to do something here. I see change happening, before they can start to sing your praises, because until then, they're going to continue to speak up and rattle cages and try to push to create change.
Yeah, I saw that shock and awe. I mean, how many of us that are in this place in what we do, or our BIPOC community, you name it, our global majority, we're like, shock and awe. No, not a shock and awe for us.
At all.
The fact that you're in shock and awe is a bit of a shock and awe for us. You know what I mean?
Right.
I was like, yeah. So anytime I hear people say like, oh my gosh, I'm so shocked. I'm like, it's unbelievable. I'm like, okay. Yeah,
right.
Not for us. It is our daily lives. So
Daily.
Thank you for being in shock. Let's do something about it now.
Right. That part. Right. Like, how do you get over it? Okay, now that you're shocked, great, wonderful. What are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
And it's that action part. And we're going down another path, because I was just like, that's why I don't even like talking about allyship, because everybody wants to give themselves that badge of honor of being an ally. And
my badge.
Right. And I'm like, but what's the action? What are you doing to prove that you're an ally? And so it's, how do organizations do that same thing? Yes, we're a great place to work. For whom? And right, what are you doing to ensure that is everyone's experience? And then that's again where the shock and awe comes. Like, what? Not everyone's having the same experience as me?
Yeah, one of the things that I advise my clients whenever we work together, because I come in from a systems side, and I think we talked about this, is that I'm looking at your business. I'm looking at it from a business strategy. Yes, I can do workshops. Yes, we can do learning journeys, but that comes after you're doing the work of looking at it really systemically, looking at it from your policy, your procedure, all the things that make up your organization, right? Yeah. And so when we're doing that, And when they say like, oh, we have pretty good or high employee engagement scores, I'm like, you're going to see that drop. I will tell you now, you'll see a drop, because people have this idea is that, oh, because everyone wants a measurement. They want that measurement right off the bat, as if it's like we can just flip a switch. But they're like, oh, okay, well, if we're doing all this work, obviously that engagement score should be going up. I'm like, no, actually, it will dip. It will dip. It will dip for a while. It may get to where you were, but what's happening is that once people see things, once they hear things, they can't unsee it, they can't unhear it. They're learning something about themselves. They're learning something about the organization. And because of that, there's like this disillusionment that was happening before will be like removed, that idea of, right, the Oz. And all of a sudden they're having to deal with this. And then on top of that, when I ask them like, oh, great, your engagement scores are high. What is your mix? What's your diversity mix in your organization? Oh, what? It's majority of it looks really similar. Well, guess what? Of course, you're going to have affinity. You're going to have affinity in there where you're like similarities. And so you're going to have, and as soon as you do start diversifying, more voices, different ideas, different way of doing things, you're not going to see it in that way. Right. So that's why measuring different aspects within your organization is really important versus just like, are we satisfied or whatever it is that, that we know surveys are also skewed. So there's that.
No, I love that. I love that. Even when I do my psychological safety assessments with organizations, I look at it by demographics.
Yeah.
Right. Because I'm like, okay, here's your overall score. That's great. Now let's look at it by race. Let's look at it by gender. Let's look at it by age.
Yeah.
Whatever the data they give me. And again, the shock and awe.
Yeah.
Of not everyone's having the same experience. Well, no, they're not, because not everyone's the same.
No, you got to look at the delta.
Yeah.
You got to look at the delta.
So it's all of these things that, come up that I think organizations need to be aware of. And I think that's why I so much appreciate now having CSR and ESG as a part of the conversation, because now you're looking at different data points. It's not just about employee satisfaction. It's how are we showing up with our customers and our clients? How are we showing up around governance? How are we showing up in the community? So you're looking at it in a more holistic way of not just how are we showing up, but how are we investing? How are we affecting? How, all of those things. And again, it's that holistic aspect of this work that so many organizations aren't quite ready for. But I think this is the direction that it possibly could go in and be successful, depending on the industry as well, too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's, the thing about it is, once you have this justice perspective or justice focused mindset, so social justice, right? Very important in DEI. And then you start looking at environmental justice, climate justice, right? You are looking at it from all these justice focused perspectives. Then you start seeing, okay, all right. One affects the other.
Absolutely.
That's again, back to the Venn diagram. There are so many areas in which once you start looking at it from a justice lens in there, then you start understanding, right? Hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah.
Some folks. So I want to do a little bit of a pivot in that. So we're now in this time where, this pending recession has been pending for a long time. And we're starting to see some jobs being cut, and kind of like at the beginning of the pandemic, one of the first set of jobs that started to get cut were DEI practitioners. How can organizations continue their DEI efforts during this time, right? Because what I fear, and hopefully after, again, the summer of 2020, it's not the case where, okay, we don't have time for that. We need to focus on the business. What can organizations do to ensure that these efforts continue during this pending time?
Yeah, so you're right. I think, when the pandemic happened, that whole like, oh, it's not, is it business critical or not? And then they're like, oh, that's not business critical. Let's like cut that, right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of organizations were approaching it from a learning perspective, right?
Yep.
Just like it's a learning and development. We're giving you these like benefits.
Yep.
That's how it was seen. It's like it's a benefit. And then George Floyd murder happened.
Mhm.
I always call it that's the line in the sand in
Yep.
DEI. That happened, and people are like, "Oh, guess what? It's a business priority," and so
Yep.
the money came back. Yeah,
Yep.
and I think for me, and for those that were working in DEI at the time within the business structure, like my clients doubled down. And so my
Mhm.
actually job didn't go down. It actually went up because they're like, oh, pandemic's happening. Now people are working remotely. That's culture. That's culture impact. That's business impact. How do we figure this out? So if they, I think, treat it like that in this upcoming change that we're going through, and if you're cutting employees, guess what? Who's having to take that burden on? Other
Yep.
employees.
Yep.
Yeah. And so then your culture is shifting, your business practice is shifting. So if you look at it from a business practice in a way that is going to impact you, then you cannot not put DEI as part of your strategy. How are you going to
Absolutely.
keep the employees you currently have? You can't just hold them because there's the fear, oh, you're going to lose your job and you're not going to get another job. Because what's interesting about what we're coming into right now is that there's still jobs out there,
Lots of them.
lots of them,
Yeah.
right? And so people are being cut in very certain areas, right? But there's
Yep.
still, the job market is still open. So it's like in this, I think even the economists are saying like, it's a weird one, right? It's a
Yeah.
weird one. We've got a lot of tech pre-cutting because of the fact that they over hired. It was
Over
almost
index.
like it
Yep.
was like about an over hiring because of a lot of tech did well during um, the pandemic because you needed
Mhm.
tech. I mean, everything went
Right.
virtual. So if you had any kind of virtual support platforms, guess what? Tech was needed.
Yeah.
Why did Amazon and eBay and all these companies do well? Like you're doing all your personal shopping at home and getting
Phew.
it through that way, and Etsy and all of those, right?
Yeah.
Their stocks went up during that time. Think about Zoom. Holy cow. Like their
Right.
stocks went up. And so all these companies that we're looking at right now, Amazon, Microsoft, Meta, Google, they're all doing the cuts right now.
Mhm.
And what's interesting is as the cuts are happening, those people are being gobbled up in those same companies. And
In
so
different areas. Yep.
it's in the different areas. So that's what's been fascinating around this
Yeah.
prepping for a recession.
And what's interesting too, and there have been a couple of articles that spoke on it, was again after the summer 2020, there's been this increase in underrepresented talent being hired, and this
Yes.
very intentional um, recruiting of this talent. But some organizations have that mindset still of first in, last out, first out, or last in, first out.
Yes.
So those are some of the jobs that are getting cut right now, right? Because they over indexed, because they overhired. And so it's now impacting underrepresented communities more than it's impacting anyone else.
Absolutely.
And so DEI needs to be a part of this conversation, because who do you have at the table that is being cognizant of who's being cut and why they're being cut, and all of those things, and where can people be reshifted? There's this increase in, as you were saying before, like learning and development, because now, okay, we can provide people with different skills so that they can be moved to other parts of the business, right? We're going to invest in you as an employee, making people
Mhm.
feel good, so that there is now loyalty within that organization. um,
Mhm.
and so it's this is interesting, like you said, this is very different. It feels very different than any other recession or pending recession. This, like I said, has
Yes.
been pending for a long time.
Pending pending recession.
And but it feels very different because there are so many jobs that are out there. Like I said, I have another client where it's a small family owned business, but they have over 200 job openings in their organization. And one of their executives said to me, DEI is priority for us right now because we need to fill those roles, right? We can't continue doing the same things we've been doing. We have to expand. We have to get different talent in. And so now folks are seeing there is actually some benefit to having DEI lens on the company, because it's so positive in so many different ways. Right now, you can have more access to your customers and clients, right? If you're speaking the language of your customers and clients because they're reflected in your employees.
Mm-hmm.
What? Who would have
I
thought?
know. Who would have thought?
So, it's just this very interesting thing. So, Kimfer, I'm going to do my last pivot with you.
Yeah.
This work is not the easiest to do. And so what do you do? How do you fill your cup? What do you do to take care of yourself?
Oh, yeah. I think that is so important for us, right? Is because doing DEI work, we know that this is emotional labor as well as the skill labor, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we get double taxed in a lot of this. And so for me, the way that I relax, one, I don't know if my dog goes, yep, there it is. Can you see him? There's my doggy. Yep. I got myself a COVID dog.
Aww.
And taking walks with him, cuddling him, he fills my cup, right?
Aww.
I have a 15-year-old son who is just lovely. He feels spending time with him fills my cup. I have a wonderful partner. We are tabletop board game
I love it.
geeks. We have over 150 board games in my house. And we love just hanging and playing, right? So for me, that and spending time with my chosen family, right? And so for me, people who aren't wanting things from me, needing things from me, who needs me in that kind of way, right? They're the ones who refill my cup because they're giving. They're giving me back that energy and that love. And so for me, those are the ways that I do. From an out of the people perspective, then my background is in art. So anyway, I can absorb art, go see art, create art, do art things also fills my cup. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. Thank you so much. How could people get in contact with you if they needed to reach you?
Yeah. So at my Kimisms, that is my handle, my Kimisms for sure. That I'm pretty live on Instagram. Typically is my social media of choice. LinkedIn, also my business media of choice. Of course, we all do that. My website, mykimisms.com, which interesting enough, I hope I can give a little sneak peek. You can still come there, but I'm in the middle of a rebrand.
Love it.
Yeah, but come there because we will redirect you when the rebrand is completed.
Good. Love it. I love it. It's always about the pivot, right?
It's about the pivot. It's always about the pivot. Yeah.
Absolutely. So Kimfer, thank you so much for being with us today. I love this conversation. We've hit so many different things.
Love it. Yeah.
But I think it's so important for organizations to start thinking about these things too, because many of them aren't even having these conversations. And so wanting to make sure that some of this is top of mind, or they can at least ask the right questions when they're at the table. So thank you again for being here with us today. And yes, thank you all for joining us again this week on this episode of DEI After 5. And you could always find us here on YouTube or on your favorite podcast platform. And again, thanks for being here, and we'll see you next time. Have a good one.